Alright, we'll start with this is Unit 11 limits, right? Day 1. So limits are pretty easy to understand, right? It's the first unit of calculus. It's basically saying as a value, as the x value approaches a certain x value, right? What will the y value be? So it's simply written out as x approaches a certain a value of the function of x, right? So it's saying as x approaches a from both sides, what will our y value be, right? And let's go to example 1, right? We'll say as x approaches -5 from both sides. So let's find -5. Right there, right? So as x approaches from both sides, we can kind of narrow in on a value, and that value will be 4. Right? So as it approaches from both sides, what will our y value be? And let's look at this one. As x approaches 2, that would be this value right here. From both sides, as it approaches 2, we can see it kind of narrows in at x or at y equals 3. Even though if the function of 2 is equal to 5 in this situation, that doesn't matter to us because the limit is defined as it approaches a value. That value is defined at 5 doesn't matter because it doesn't approach the value 5. The graph approaches the value 3 as x approaches 2. And let's look at 0, right? It's fine. Let's just use a different color. Let's see as x approaches 0. So as it goes from here, down here, as it approaches up. Well, you can tell that they approach different values. And the limit is defined as it approaches from both sides. So that's simply written as does not exist, right? DNE, right? So it approaches different values from both sides. So it just doesn't exist. So that should be pretty intuitive. And we'll just look at example 4, right? So we're using a graph. We're using a graphing calculator to find the limit of x to the 0. X when x approaches 0 with this function right here. Well, if x is equal to 0, well, 1 minus cosine of 0 over 0. So that means 1 minus 1 over 0, which means 0 is 0. So it's undefined. The value is undefined. So we know that this value is undefined, but we're trying to find as it approaches 0 what that value will be. Well, let's start with negative 0.1. We'll end up with negative 0.05. Just write the rest out. And right, and from the right side, all right, it's pretty much the same values. Right, so we can tell, right, as it approaches this 0 value, y becomes increasingly close to the value 0. But just at that 1 0 point, it's going to be undefined. But as it approaches from the left and the right side, as it approaches 0, the y value will equal 0. Right? And that's what a limit is. Right? And then we'll see this in the limit unit is where a to the plus value, right? That means as it approaches from the right side, from the positive side, what will our y value be? And same with the negative. As it approaches from the left side or as it approaches from the negative side, what will our y value be, right? Because without the positive or without the negative, it will equal as it approaches from both sides. But defining it as positive or defining it as negative, it'll tell us as it approaches from either the right side or the left side. Let's look at this, right? So the limit of negative as x approaches -2 from the left side, right? From the negative side. Well, we can see it has this little curves, and then it'll eventually approach the value y equals 1. So let's write a 1 there. And as it approaches from the positive side, it'll approach 0. And as it approaches from both sides, well, it approaches to different numbers. So that's just defined as does not exist and a function of -2. So no limits, right? That would be this point right here would equal 1. Right? That's fairly easy. And then let's just go to let's see. Where can we go? Let's look at these. Okay, well, let's think about this, right? If the limit of x approaches 2 does not exist, then the limit of 2 positive doesn't exist either, right? So the best way for me to think about these is I need to find the situation where it does exist, or I need to find the situation where it doesn't exist, right? I just basically think about situations. Well, let's think about it this way. It's possible that the limit doesn't exist because the positive side and the negative sides don't match. But that doesn't mean that the limit of 2 from the positive side doesn't exist, right? It could still exist. But on the other hand, it also couldn't exist as some examples, right? It could just not have a graph. It could not be defined at that one point. Could not be defined from the positive side. So I'd write sometimes here because in one situation it happens, in another situation it doesn't happen. And then we'll look at as x approaches from the positive side doesn't exist, then the limit of x approaches 2 doesn't exist either. Well, in order for the limit of x approaches 2 to exist, we need it from the positive and the negative side. We need both values to match at one point. Well, our first statement says that as x approaches 2 from the positive side just doesn't exist entirely. So that just means that the limit of x approaches 2 will not exist either because it doesn't have a positive side to begin with. So that's just never. It'll never happen. Or that's just always. It will always happen. All right. Okay, infinities. Well, infinities are pretty easy, right? So it's basically saying as x approaches negative 2 from the negative side, so just find negative 2 is this value from the negative side, right? That's the left side. It'll go all the way up. It'll go to positive infinity as x approaches negative 2 from the positive side, from the right side. It'll also approach infinity. It's basically the same thing over and over again. All right, and then we'll just do one more as x approaches negative 2. Well, both of these values match, right? It'll both go to positive infinity. So this will go to positive infinity also. 0 to the negative 1 side, or 0 to the negative side, right? So negative side is the left side. It'll go all the way down to negative infinity, right? It's the same thing over and over again, right? So this should be pretty easy. There's pretty much no math in this. It's just all conceptual. It's sums up limits is basically as the x value approaches a certain value, what will that y value be? Right? That's the entire concept of limits.